We're getting a brand new Half-Life game.
In VR?
Hot take. Valve.
Half-Life 3 confirmed.
Yeah, let's hope that's a fact. So there's a rumor from PC Gamer that a brand new game that's in VR called Half-Life Alyx is going to be revealed at the Video Game Awards this year. And well, there are questions. An unconfirmed internet source posted an unreleased interview with Jeff Keighley, who is the host and creator of the Video Game Awards, and also he is the creator of the Final Hours series of behind-the-scenes digital books that he actually did with Valve at one point for Portal 2. He was talking with Robin Walker, who had a development role on Half-Life 2 and co-developed Team Fortress 2, and a third unidentified person. The poster claims that the source of this leak is the same source that leaked the footage of Dota Underworlds. And folks, we don't know if all of this really comes together to be a real source, but what we can tell you is that a lot of this stuff kind of sounds like it could be real, but it still is something to take with a grain of salt.
It's because we want it to be real.
Yes. Yeah.
We have wanted this forever.
Yeah, pretty much. I think, how long has it been? How old are we now?
11 years?
Half-Life 2 has been out.
Half-Life 2 episode, Half-Life
Episode
2.
Episode 2, yeah.
Half-Life 2 episode 2, that was like 11 years ago, because
Yes.
that was Orange Box.
Yeah, it's been some time. But something to keep in mind here, folks. Why would this be so important for Jeff Keighley? Well, you may not know this, all right? But Jeff Keighley is one of those people that started his entire community of the video game industry reporting and stuff working with Valve. In the early days, he actually covered the original Half-Life. Not many people were actually talking about it back then, but he was. And that's one of those things. There's these really old pictures of him and Gabe Newell smiling and that kind of stuff, really, really old school. And this means to me that if they were ever going to announce a Half-Life game,
Makes sense that Jeff Keighley is the one that does it, especially considering the Anime Awards is kind of his big baby thing. It has been known to show off games in the past that Keighley has been in some way involved with, usually Kojima related so far. But yeah, so if it was going to come out, if Valve wanted to say, hey, there's a new Half-Life, it's either going to be at something like E3, because that's kind of what they did with some Portal-related things in the past.
That's true.
But since that's a little far out at this point, having it done at the Game Awards through Jeff Keighley makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about what this could possibly be, because both Tristan and myself have played a ton, and I'm talking about a ton of VR games. Unfortunately, when it comes to Half-Life related VR games, only one of us have played the mod for Half-Life 2 that allows you to play it in VR. That made me mindlessly sick. But I
can imagine.
Yeah, there are actual Valve has made a really cool VR package of games and experiences with the not with Oculus Rift, but with the HTC Vive.
Yes.
Now Valve,
those are free, I believe.
Yes,
as long as you have a Vive.
As long as you have a Vive, yeah. There's also another VR headset that has been released recently called the Valve Index.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is its own headset. It's got a different kind of controller that kind of figures out where your fingers are in free space. It's a little wild, but that one is kind of Valve's baby. So if you were to do this, it sounds like it'd be something you'd release on that hardware, but Valve is one of those companies that tries to get everything to work on everything, so we really don't know what they're aiming for here, if this is going to be real.
Well, they try to get everything on everything, but at the same time, they are also the pioneers of Steam. They were the ones that released the original Half-Life 2, being like, yeah, if you're playing it on PC, which you kind of had to do a lot of the time when it came out originally. I'm not sure if it... Oh, this is going way back. Did it come out for PC first, or was it a simultaneous release with consoles? Because I know you could play Half-Life 2 on Xbox.
Half-Life 2 was released on PC first.
Okay.
Yes. It came out on consoles a little bit afterwards. Original Xbox had Half-Life 2.
But when it was released on PC, and it has always been related to Steam on PC. You could not play Half-Life 2. You cannot play Half-Life 2 on PC without having Steam. So it kind of makes sense in another way that if they're going to try and hawk this hardware, that they do it with Half-Life.
That's true. Now, let's just talk about the title, because this is pretty much all we got to go off of here, folks. It's called Half-Life Alyx. Who is Alyx in Half-Life? She is one of the major characters in Half-Life 2. Gordon Freeman spends a large part of the game going along with her in the story, and the last thing we see, not to spoil anything, in Half-Life 2 Episode 2 is Alyx. We're not going to spoil the story. It's almost a decade later. We don't really need to spoil the story because you probably already know what it is. But at this
We're
point,
still being nice.
yeah, could this be a VR game where you take the role of Alex, seeing her entire experience through Half-Life 2? Or is this an entirely new experience that continues the story of Half-Life 2 finally?
I don't think that it'll be like Half-Life 2 from Alex's perspective, because I think that Valve will very much keep the idea of Gordon Freeman the way it is. And that basically means that showing Half-Life 2 from a different perspective is impossible because Gordon doesn't talk.
That's true.
Gordon will never talk.
Yes.
Gordon has shown up as a secondary character in other Half-Life games
just be a muted
before.
guy that just shows up every time
Pretty
you
much.
see Alex. Yeah.
A couple of the Gearbox games that were made, like for Half-Life 1, like Opposing Force and Blue Shift, you did see Gordon Freeman in the background. He didn't talk.
That's true.
He was just doing his thing that was going on in Half-Life 1 while other people were doing their thing. The only way I could see that working is if you were to see Alex and showing what she was doing when she wasn't around Gordon, but that just doesn't make sense because then there'll be like logical like gameplay jumps that doesn't really make sense.
I agree.
At the same time, slight spoiler, over the course of the episodes, like episode 1 and episode 2 of Half-Life 2, we do know that in-universe, the G-Man has been becoming increasingly more interested in Alex Vance as a character. So it is conceivable that at one point in time, he's going to be like, okay, well, Gordon Freeman's been doing his thing, and the Vortigons have been stopping me from using him. He doesn't seem all that interested. But this Alex person, I might have an in with there.
Yeah, I feel like it might go in that direction for the narrative of the story, but the problem really is, can you play as Alex in a Half-Life game? And you know what?
And do you want to play that in VR?
I don't think you can. Every time we play one of the Half-Life universe games. So, Half-Life universe games means Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Episode 1, Episode 2, the expansion packs for the original Half-Life. This also includes the Half-Life 2, PlayStation 2 co-op experience.
Oh, that thing that nobody played.
Not everybody played that, but that exists. And let's not forget Portal. Both Portal 1 and Portal 2 take place in the Half-Life universe. And both of those, all those games I just talked about, those characters do not have speaking roles. Although for the PlayStation 2 co-op thing, that might have been different, but that's technically not canon. Everything else we talked about, though, is. Now, if you were to be Alex, that couldn't really work. So I think how this would actually be something that could exist is we're seeing Alex at an earlier state of time, maybe before all the events between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, and like you're around her as another character, possibly.
Could be. Another thing to keep in mind is that all we have is a title.
Yeah.
We don't have a genre.
That's true.
We don't know if it's going to be a first-person action.
Could you be Dog? Do you think that could be a thing?
You could be Dog.
See, for those of you that don't know, Dog is like this, basically, what do you call it, robot?
Yeah, he's a robot dog.
Yeah, robot dog. Well, like that character could actually be the character you are being around Alex. That way you're just following Alex's story.
We're just spitballing here, though.
Dog doesn't talk, right? So
But
that's why it could work.
Going back to the genre thing is like, it could be any genre we want, as long as it's not like a card game or something that Valve decides to do. But
that's important, though.
While I haven't played Half-Life 2 in VR, I have played Fallout 4 in VR. I think I played Doom in VR, and those kind of games, they can work, but they're not great.
Yes.
When I was playing through Fallout 4, and I can imagine that Skyrim also in VR has the same sort of problems, dealing with movement and controls and doing all of that at the same time in a VR space, because it's not designed for it, because the game wasn't built around it, it was very hard to get a grasp on what to do, and it was a lesser experience in my mind. Now, the counter to that could be that, well, if Valve is designing this game for this, it'll be slightly different. It'll be designed around the fact that this is what you're going to be playing it on, versus like Fallout 4 was designed for original consoles with a gamepad or for PC with mouse and keyboard. So the VR thing was just added afterwards, and it was done sort of poorly. It's like going and seeing a film that was like converted to work in 3D, but really it was not filmed that way at all.
Yeah, see, I think that this is a huge gamble and a risk. If this is going to be a new Half-Life game, you're right, it can't just be a card game, because you would incite the rage of so many fans who have been promised this next chapter for so long. any kind of story that exists in the Half-Life universe,
Mhm.
even at this point, you need to have something that is good gameplay that is worth using the Half-Life name. There is a very big danger here, folks. If they basically make a new Half-Life game that isn't very good, there is an entire generation of gamers right now that have never played a Half-Life game on release. So this would be the first time that they do that, and utilizing an entirely new technology to play that,
Mhm.
it could redefine what that technology is. It could be the game for VR.
It could. So, like, dealing with fan expectations is something that they're going to have to deal with. And it is very possible that their mindset is everyone's going to be disappointed in it no matter what we do, because expectations for Half-Life 3 or Half-Life 2 Episode 3 or whatever it ends up, whatever it could have been, like, those expectations are so high, they're like, there's no way we're going to meet that. So we're just going to not worry about fan expectations. And that, depending on what they do and how far away from whatever expectations people might have, might be a little bit dicey.
Yeah, like I honestly, folks, this is a weird one because there's a fan base out there of Half-Life fans.
Mhm.
They may not get into VR and may not want to get into VR. Their next game they want to be is another first-person shooter experience that exists primarily on PCs. But we're looking at this the way that Valve is trying to introduce things, and maybe this is the way to bridge those audiences together. VR is very expensive to get into. It's very hard to get it right. And even with the setups that we've used in the past, which is a locked room that's completely empty with
Not
like...
everybody has that.
Yeah, and even then, it still doesn't work 100% of times. There's actually like problems where it doesn't always track you in free space properly. We are to understand at this point in time, Valve Index is one of the best, if not best, headsets and best controllers ever introduced to VR. But even though we're like big gamers, I've never played with that set. It's just, it's never been a thing. And to know that if there is a new Half-Life experience, and I'm such a big fan, I will go out and buy it, I have to drop literal hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, depending on what I'm going to get exactly, just to play that thing. That worries me.
And that's just like been an additional problem with VR, because like we have the benefit of being able to, in some ways, afford these headsets.
Yes.
But here in the office, we have two.
Yeah.
We have two VR headsets. We have the Vive and we have PSVR.
Yes.
But then for Valve to come along and be like, yeah, no, we're going to push this new thing in VR, but you need our headset. Then it's like, well, we've already spent money on these other headsets, so now we have to get a third headset?
Yeah. So
Like,
I think it's going... If Valve does this right, I think what they're going to do is they're going to make a game that works across the board. Likely the best experience is going to be with the Index. I can only imagine that. You wouldn't introduce a new piece of hardware and then not use that experience, not use what it does properly.
but at the same time, I would think that they'd also be pretty dumb to not offer it on other headsets in some way. Like offer it being available through the HTC Vive. Valve has done a lot of collaborations with Sony in like the Portal universe and things like that, because Portal, I think, was like first on PS3 or PS4 when that first came out. There was an exclusivity thing, so they actually showed up like when Gabe Newell walked on the stage.
Oh,
during
PlayStation 3 had a
E3
Portal
event.
2 variation, and you could play co-op on PC and PlayStation at the same time.
Yeah, so it's not entirely like out of the realm of possibility that for a console release of this game, they might do something with PSVR and work with those guys.
You know, if it's the only company I can see them working side by side because they have a pre-established relationship with in the past is Sony. I could see them making a PSVR version of this, but once you do that, there are things that happen that remove the experience of it. For instance, the concept of room scale, which if you don't know about VR too much, basically in what we have now with the HTC Vive and the Valve Index, you can be in a big room and you can walk around in that room and interact with things in the room. But PSVR, it's more or less a seated experience. It doesn't work the same way. Yeah. I mean, you can stand up and play certain games that way, and they totally work. But to actually move around and stuff, it's a little bit more complex. I'm curious about this. Personally, I think it's going to be a game about dog. I think that's going to be where it goes. You're going to be a machine because that machine doesn't talk. I think it's going to be something about the first time that it's turned on and dealing with Alex that way. And that way there's this character walking you through this experience. I believe that's what this is going to be. Maybe it's not. But folks, what do you expect? Do you think this is going to be a VR game that's going to finally bring people into playing VR? Or do you think Valve is wasting their time and they probably should just make Half-Life 3 finally?